And in this powerful and deeply introspective episode, I'm joined by Dawn Nelson, the author of Bone by Bone, Healing the Emotional Wounds of Preverbal and Childhood Abuse. Through her raw and courageous storytelling, Dawn takes us on a journey into the hidden layers of early trauma, the kind that happens before words, before memory, yet shapes everything that follows. Drawing from her own lived experience and years of reflection, Dawn uncovers how emotional neglect, especially in infancy, leaves invisible scars, and how facing the truth, no matter how painful, becomes a pathway to freedom. Her story is not just about trauma, but about reclamation, finding compassion, truth, and self love in the very places we once felt abandoned. This conversation invites us to look inward, to explore what lies beneath the surface of our own healing, and to remember that it's never too late to reparent the child within. So, welcome to the show, Dawn. It's such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much for inviting me on.
Amazing. So, Dawn, I just wanted to ask about, what first inspired you to revisit your early life story after so many years, and what made you decide
Mhm.
to write Bone by Bone?
Well, Bone by Bone is actually a expansion. It's about 90 more pages. It's a revision expansion of a book I wrote 5 years ago, Little Girl Found. Um, how I reclaimed myself after early childhood abuse. I can't even remember the title at the moment. But but this book, I realized that the reclaiming goes on. I mean, it's going to take a lifetime, maybe many lifetimes. It just keeps going because there are things that keep coming up to me now that were caused by that early abuse. But more to your question, I think, well, here's how it actually started. Years ago, I was sitting in a garden with my youngest daughter and my husband and some other people, and she started talking about my childhood. And I thought, well, no, no, that's not quite how it was, you know. And then I got interested actually in actually revisiting, actually letting in the memories, but also I got some primary sources from Kentucky archives, depositions. I got my the children's home where I lived for 2 years to send my records. And then I had many letters between my father and my birth mother. And so I started actually perusing those for the first time in my life and laying them all out and making notes. And I finally decided I'm gonna, I knew that writing could be therapeutic. I knew that from when I had cancer and was writing in a journal, which eventually became my book, Making Friends with Cancer. But I knew how therapeutic writing could be. And so I started writing. And as the memories came up for me, some of them crystal clear, some of them the very same as every time I remembered. I because I don't know why, but even though I'd done a lot of therapies, somatic and cognitive, things started coming up for me. I mean, I started crying, hissing, sobbing, fighting, growling. All these things started happening. And I was able to let that happen and then write it down. I was also able to write some things from my current perspective, because 80 years later, you have a different perspective than you did when you were very young. So, yeah, it was an emotional endeavor for sure, and physical actually too. So, did that answer your question?
You did, thank you so much. And also, I wanted to ask about the actual title and what inspired you to name it Bone by Bone.
Ah, well, if I may, I'll just read a short poem that is what actually Emily Dickinson poem, which is in the first chapter of the book. And I won't write my comments, but I'll just read the poem. There is a pain so utter it swallows substance up, then covers the abyss with trance, so memory can step around, across, upon it. As one within a swoon goes safely, where one with an open eye would drop him bone by bone. So that's really what first made me. Actually, a friend of mine had suggested 5 years ago that I call that book Bone by Bone, and I didn't get it. I just kind of, it didn't sink in for me. And then a friend of mine, Joseph Urbano, wrote a poem, and there's a line in the poem: "There is a light in the bones, a sacred hollow, vast and light, where we are always standing." So that kind of clinched the title for me. Although I've noticed that people take things different ways. So sometimes people think there's a different reason that I called it that.
Amazing.
And
Yeah.
there are other books by that name, some novels and
Yeah.
some memoirs, although mine has a different subtitle.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much. And so you also open your book with quotes about writing what disturbs you and being split open in inverted commas. What was it like to actually face that level of emotional exposure in your own story?
It was exhausting,
Mm, yeah.
for one thing. I mean, yeah, that was, I think, Natalie Goldberg who said, write what you fear, write what scares you, And for years, I did Natalie Goldberg's prompting writing, just writing 10 minutes a day on something.
Mm,
And it definitely was exhausting. It was emotional. I remember one day I was looking at some old photos that I'd found some negatives and I had the photos developed, and I found a photo of me with my father's second wife, who he married, and she'd never met me. And he married her after a few weeks to get a mother for me, apparently, to get a mother for me. But anyway, I found this photo and I realized, oh, that's got to be this woman. And I'm looking at the photo and I see that she's like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into here? And she left after, I don't know, a month or something. But I was looking at the photo and I said, we could have been a family. And my husband said, Don, who are you yelling at? And I showed him the picture, and he saw that. But then he saw this other picture of me with my grandmother, who was given custody of me after my birth mother was arrested, and he said to me, she's claiming you, she's got you, and you could see it in the picture.
mm,
You could just see the difference in those two pictures. I did. I felt very unconditionally loved by her and claimed by her, and that's probably what saved my life, frankly,
mm.
to have that for a couple of years.
Thank you for sharing that. And so you write about how emotional neglect can be even more damaging than physical abuse. Can you explain why early pre-verbal trauma has such like an impact on development?
Well, the interesting thing is pre-verbal, which just means before language, or before you can speak, and my primary abandonment happened to me when I was 13 months old. But
Mm,
I then found out that there was neglect on a daily basis, that my birth mother would just co go out, be gone all day, and then sleeping a awful night, that she was drinking, all this stuff that I discovered, and then which culminated one day in her not coming back for several nights. But the interesting thing is that I've learned now is that it can happen in utero. If a birth mother, if a pregnant mother is highly distressed or anxious or deeply upset, which I think my birth mother was, plus she was an alcoholic, then these kinds of things can happen that will affect your health mentally, even physically, for years. And they can also lie dormant for years and then come out in adulthood. So it's very interesting to me that even in utero, you know, that can happen. That trauma can occur. That
wow.
has later consequences.
Mm, wow. Yeah, you just wouldn't even think it. I mean, we get told to speak to our babies whilst they're in the tummy, but obviously it's showing our baby love and care and, just positive words. But if that's not the case, if they're hearing otherwise, if they're hearing arguments and abuse, then I guess that could obviously be trauma for them even before they're born.
Yeah, it was very interesting to me to discover that, to read that about that.
Mm,
And the interesting thing is that when I saw my birth mother when she was dying in the hospital, I thought, well, this is my only chance, I guess, and I'm going to ask her what she remembered about my birth. Now, my grandmother had already told me because I asked her the same question. What did anything unusual happen around my birth? And I'd read in a letter that my birth mother had written to my father, there's no way I'm giving birth without drugs, she said in that letter. Well,
mm,
then when I asked her the question, she said, well, I was knocked out for the last 5 or 6 hours before you were born, and I didn't see you until you were 6 hours old. And I don't think that's any way to bond with a child.
mm.
And my grandmother said she was disappointed because I wasn't a boy. And I remember thinking, so this is what all this is about. If I'd just been born male instead of female, then my life would have been different.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Wow. That's, yeah, absolutely. That's quite significant. So how does this kind of trauma live in the body, and how did it actually begin to surface for you later on in life?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, the things that came up for me. And the uh I want to read you a quote by Pema Chodron because uh it really just struck me. Oh my gosh, that's what how I am. She said, I didn't realize how attached I was to having somebody else confirm me as being okay. In other words, it didn't come from inside me. It came from somebody else's approval of me,
Mm,
which is exactly how, I mean, I learned at a very early age to just figure out what the adult in charge wanted and do it, to because I didn't feel seen, I didn't feel heard, I didn't feel claimed, I didn't feel, loved, I didn't feel valued.
yeah.
And ultimately I felt like, well, if my mother, the woman who gave birth to me, didn't love me, not ultimately, but in for a while. If she didn't love me, then I must be flawed. I must not be, I'm not a worthwhile person.
Mm,
So then I just felt guilt and shame and later in life I could see how that colored, all these things colored my decision-making process as an adult. And the way I didn't ever trust anybody to not leave me and all of that sort of thing.
beautiful.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's
I have
so
a note here that says, take a breath, Dawn, slow down.
no, you're doing great. So, when you actually discovered like the legal records about your mother's neglect, what was that experience like emotionally and physically?
It was awful. I mean, the interesting thing is that um, I actually knew the name of the judge who had literally taken me from my mother's arms and handed me to my grandmother. And
Mm,
I looked it up, and his son is not a yeah, his son is still in law, a lawyer.
mm,
And so I called him. I was able to get a hold of him. And he told me, well, here's what you can, he said, we don't have any records anymore, but from that long ago, grandfather maybe. But he said, Kentucky Archives. So I contacted them and I finally got these depositions, and it told the woman who came and took me to the hospital and the police when they came and got in the apartment. It had details about all that thing, all those things. And and so then it was like, okay, I can't keep the fantasy that I've tried to have all these years. Maybe she was just terribly lonely. My father was in the war. She was lonely, she was depressed. She went out to get a drink and somebody took her home and she just kind of wanted to forget she had a baby for a night. Maybe she just but I mean, I couldn't keep that fantasy because it was 3 days and 3 nights. And then the woman described the scene when she found me in my bed and wet and dirty. And she described that there were highballs right by the bed and that the whole apartment was a mess, like there'd been a party there. And there was beer everywhere and all alcohol everywhere.
Mhm.
and she took me to the hospital. But when I found out all those things, it was like, okay, well, I can't hold on to any fantasy about the way it was because this is how it was.
Yeah.
And so I actually ended up in a fetal position, sobbing, as I recall, on a bed. But then I was able to write about it, after, but it was like very, very emotional and exhausting.
Mm.
And I'm happy that I had that facility to be able to write about it, to write it down.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, writing's just been such a game changer for so many of us. And I guess,
Right, as you know.
yeah, and just yeah, I mean, like my book started off with just me journaling about the events, really, because I was a lot of the events I just suppressed, I hid, and so they were just buried within me. I had no idea what was going on. All I felt was just anxiety and depression, but I had no idea where it come from. So just actually starting to write from events that were really dominant in my mind really helped. And then as I was writing, more and more were coming up. And it was like a 2 year process really for a lot of the memories to actually come out. It was a very slow, steady process. And then
Right.
I started to started to fit all the jigsaw puzzles together. And then I understood why I was suffering from anxiety and depression. It's because of complex post-traumatic stress disorder from so many traumatic events that had happened to me from such a young age. So yeah, writing has just been a game changer.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't work for everybody necessarily, but I know James Pennebaker was the psychologist author, was one of the first people to espouse writing as a therapeutic exercise. He said, I think it was he who said, but it only works if you let the emotions come up with it,
Mm.
which I found was very true, at least for me, that you had to. I mean, I first discovered writing as therapy when I had ovarian cancer, like 25 years ago now, over 25 years ago. And a
Mm.
very wise therapist, author friend of mine gave me a journal to write in. And so whenever I felt up to it, I did. I mean, I kept journals for years, but this was specifically about after my surgery, and I was going through treatments, and I would write and I would draw sometimes too. And and then I gave my daughter a journal she was 10 or 11 at the time and extremely having a really hard time with me losing my hair and her fear that I might die. And my eyelashes were gone, so I couldn't give her butterfly kisses anymore. It was a really hard time for her and
Mm.
seeing me bald. And and in fact, when she came to the hospital to see me, she fainted because I was hooked up to so many tubes.
Yeah.
So she would write and I would write, and sometimes we'd write at the same time, and then eventually we could share what we'd written with each other.
Yeah.
So it was a sweet experience in many ways, and eventually then I wrote Making Friends with Cancer. But that's the first time I realized how therapeutic it could be to write.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And you describe feeling both grief and relief. Can you talk about this paradox?
Grief and relief. Well, relief, yeah, because I decided to not hide from the story anymore. I decided to open to it. I decided to look at it.
Mhm.
And as I say, I had to sort of give up my fantasy of the way things were once I had all the documents. And yet, and yet, um, again, during my cancer, I started doing a gratitude practice.
Mhm.
And eventually, because there were so many things I couldn't do, and I think it's essential. Well, to me now, gratitude practices. I did it for about 2 hours this morning. I couldn't sleep
Oh,
because
yeah.
and I mean, I do it before I go to bed, waking up. I do it anytime. I mean, waiting in the post office in line. It's such an incredible practice. And of course, books have now been written about this, and there's podcasts on gratitude and how it can heal us, really. But back to your question. So I was doing this gratitude practice, and then one day, suddenly, it came up. I was grateful to my birth mother.
Mm.
I was grateful to her for giving birth to me. I was grateful that I stayed alive for 13 months,
Wow.
that she was willing to let me go. And I even thought to myself, well, maybe she was wise enough to realize that she couldn't be a mother right then. Maybe it was actually something positive on her part, to give me to my grandparents.
Yeah.
But I was thankful, and I was thankful that I'd gotten to meet her when I was 17. I was thankful I got to see her before she died. I mean, that was kind of a little surprising.
Yeah.
And yet, besides the trauma that comes up there are also positive effects. You
Mhm.
can actually have positive effects from the trauma that's happened,
Yeah.
is what I feel. At least that's what I've experienced.
Definitely, yeah. And so, how did actually learning the truth change the whole story you'd been telling yourself about your childhood?
It was kind of a relief to know the truth.
Mm.
And then it was kind of even though it was hard, it was emotional as I said, I couldn't carry the fantasy around about why she'd left me or why I was left alone for 3 days, although that was
Mhm.
kind of magical thinking. But it was so it was kind of a relief, even though it was hard. But I think that now I can see the good things that came. It was Oprah Winfrey that said, forgiveness happens when you give up wishing that things had been different. And I did used to wish that. If only I'd had a different mother. What if I'd had a different mother? What if this? What if that? And then she also said, but real forgiveness happens when you can say thank you for the experience, which I finally was able to do
Yeah.
because I saw that positive things had also come out of it. I
Mm.
mean, I developed empathy at a young age, and even though all these things were going on where I felt unseen and unheard and everything, I learned how to read people at a very early age, how to figure out what they needed, what they wanted.
Mhm.
And in fact, when I was in kindergarten, I was at the children's home, and I started kindergarten because I had just turned 5. And I was the only person, I guess, my age that lived in my particular area of this children's home. So a couple of older kids, I think, slightly older kids walked the 2 or 3 blocks it was to school and dropped me off at the room. And a very lovely young woman with long dark hair, very smiling face, greeted me, took me to a place. Now I'm in another strange place
Mm.
and sat me down. And then she had to go back to greet the other people coming in the door. And she was the only person there. I don't, today we have assistant teachers and everything, but she seemed to be a lead teacher. I don't know how many kids were in there.
Mm.
Anyway, a little boy with snow white hair, whose name I have never forgotten, his mother left him very quickly, and he started crying inconsolably, just inconsolably. And she brought the boy over and sat him down next to me, actually. And then she had to leave. And I mean, my mission was clear. I just, I stuck to that little boy like glue the rest of the day. I just put my attention on it. And he did finally stop crying. I don't think he ever smiled. But when it came time for us to roll out our mats and the kids to take a rest, some kids fell asleep. He and I didn't fall asleep. I just kept my attention on him. We didn't talk. And then they pass out the graham crackers and milk. And I have always hated graham crackers, never liked them. So I offered them to him, and he didn't want them either. And then somehow this kind of bonded us. We had this little bonding. I mean, I don't remember anything else about kindergarten
Mm.
except for that story. But
Oh,
I realized looking back on it that I had already developed this ability to feel empathy and compassion for other people that were also feeling unheard or unseen.
yeah. Absolutely, yeah. So, and yeah, so you also mentioned that an unseen child creates a false self to survive. How can somebody begin to recognize and gently dismantle that false self in their adulthood? Mhm.
Well, I mean, I started, I moved to California in the 80s and there were all kinds of things available, all kinds of help and
Yeah.
workshops and retreats um and I was lucky enough, I think this is the longest chapter in the book, but I was introduced to a residential meditation retreat that's sometimes called the Enlightenment Intensive or the Awakening Intensive. And it just uses, it's not connected to any religion or particular spiritual point of view, which I liked. And it's just a simple process where you just sit with different partners in a dyad and you are given an instruction, such as tell me who you are or tell me what you are, tell me what another is. And so each person has 5 minutes to talk and you change over, but you don't comment. You keep your attention on your partner, you say thank you, and you make no comments. So that's the short story. I mean, I did many of those. I ended up helping train others to do them and giving them myself. But that kind of it's when I really started to get that I was okay. Nothing was wrong with me, that I was innocent. And I took a 2 week, one of those that lasted 2 weeks where I was a participant. And on the last day, I was taking a mindfulness walk, and it was in my neighborhood because this happened in my home, and I heard a baby crying, and it just stopped me in my tracks. I felt like I was that baby crying, you know, like why
Mhm.
isn't anybody paying attention? But I just at that point though, I just kind of surrendered everything I knew. I just kind of let it go and just opened up to whatever is real.
Mm.
So and at the time, my second husband was wanting me to have a baby, but he dropped it because I said I wasn't going to have any more children. And and at that point, I thought, well, I guess I should give that up too. Maybe I'm meant to have another child. I just dropped everything, just kind of surrendered right there on the sidewalk that day. And I ended up having another child, and which is her story is also in the book. But so and then I started later compassionate touch for those in later life stages, which gave me an opportunity to it was another part of my healing, really, because it was so how to say the word for me, it was such a deep lesson in how people are sitting around in nursing homes just waiting for somebody to say hello, waiting for somebody to pay attention in a way that doesn't have to do with medication or bathing and it's amazing how you just see people light up if you just go. So
Mhm.
I was doing sessions with people who some of them didn't receive many visitors, some of them were just waiting in their beds or in the wheelchair in the hallway. I remember a woman I later got to know quite well. And one day she was just sitting in the hallway in her wheelchair. And I just kind of leaned down and I touched her lightly on the shoulder and I said, "How are you doing today? How are you?" She said, "Just waiting, waiting, waiting." That's what she said. And I've seen that now so many times. And I've seen how what a gift it can be for someone in the hospital, someone near death, someone with dementia, someone that's not used to getting any focused attention, with unconditional attention. And for me, it was such a gift to be able to be with people like that. I mean, it still is. I don't do it formally anymore, but I do it on a volunteer basis sometimes. And I learned so much from that. And you know, I could tell you so many stories. People sometimes are written up as nonverbal. In the chart, it'll say nonverbal. And I was seeing this woman, tall woman with a hair in a bun and in a wheelchair for twice a month. And she didn't, she'd finally started to make eye contact with me. I'd finally been able to sit beside her, holding her hand, rubbing her back. And one day, out of the blue, this was after months of seeing her, she said, "My husband and I used to dance, like to dance." I said,
Mhm.
I said, "Well, where did you go? Where did you dance?" And she proceeded to talk to me for 10 minutes. And I went to the desk and I said, "This woman is not nonverbal, you know." However, if somebody doesn't feel, I think, it's not the first time I've come upon this either, but I think if somebody feels that your attention isn't really on them, you don't really care. You
Yeah.
know, I remember watching a caregiver sit with someone, this woman actually had dementia, but she's sitting with her, she's feeding her, and she puts something in her mouth and then she's looking around. And then pretty soon she puts something in her mouth again, you
Wow.
know, paying no attention whatsoever to her. And this another wonderful woman who I was with who had dementia. She seemed like she was never going to talk. She seemed like she didn't kind of know what was going on. And one day when I was holding her hand, I said, "Your hair looks nice today." I called her by name, and she said, "I thank you, thank you." You know, she said something. There was this moment, she wasn't always able to communicate, but there was a moment when I knew, we both knew. We also watched somebody come in and water a fake plant. And we looked at each other and somehow we both knew the plant was fake, but they were watering it. You know, so there was just these little moments of recognition where you feel both gotten, both seen, heard. So, I mean, it was another type of healing for me, I think, in my healing process.
That is, yeah. Oh, I love that. And so, were there any practices or processes which helped you to reconnect with the unmothered part of yourself?
Hmm, interesting question. Um, well, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of practices. In fact, um, but my husband and I mean, now I am so, if we have time, I want to tell you this other story. My husband, my second husband, who's Jewish and a product of a dialectical culture who thinks that thrives on passionate discourse,
Mm,
um, he was raised to express his feelings fully
mm,
and completely as they surfaced, what might be called healthy anger. But that I just couldn't take that, you know, even his tone of voice, even when he'd talk louder, I'd feel like I'm being the energy is so anyway, eventually though, um, he was always encouraging me to express my feelings, you know, to get in touch with my anger, upset, whatever. And so one day, finally we got to the point where I could talk back to him or I could have this. And one day our argument escalated and I got so upset. I got out some red lipstick I never use. And on this long mirror, I wrote these things in large letters with lipstick using a few swear words I'd never uttered in my life. And then I grabbed my keys, I slammed the door, I ran out, and I went to a movie. And I'm sitting in the movie theater. I have no clue what movie I was watching. And about halfway through, I thought, oh my gosh, I've ruined this relationship now. I've done something horrible, you know. And so I went home and I'm tiptoeing inside. I opened the door slowly. I'm tiptoeing in, hoping maybe he hasn't seen what I wrote on the mirror. And he's there. He's welcoming me with open arms. He
Wow.
grabs me. He said, "Dawn, do you realize this is the first time you've ever been able to be in touch with your anger and actually express it?" And so it was quite the turning point, you know, for me in that sense, to be able to actually express what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And And of course, the dyads that I mentioned earlier in the meditation retreats helped that, and I still do those. We're doing them on Zoom now sometimes, but and my husband and I sometimes do dyads, or we chant together, or we read poetry. I'm I'm happy to say that
Mhm.
after 43 years of marriage, it's actually getting better,
Yeah.
better and better. It's deepening, and now we have tools that we use, when we disagree about something. How important is it to you on a 1 to 10? Or if things get really bad, we wave this little white flag, and it just means we're not going to make our preferences more important than our relationship.
Mm.
So, I mean, yes, I do have some tools now.
Beautiful. Yeah. I love that. Thank you. And so one of the most powerful threads in your book is actually about compassion, both for your parents and for yourself. How did you actually arrive at that place without actually minimizing the harm?
Yeah, very interesting. Uh, I'm gonna read you this Thich Nhat Hanh. It's at toward the end of the book. You probably didn't get that far, but one day I was listening to a a, I was watching an interview that Oprah Winfrey did with Thich Nhat Hanh in I think it was maybe 2013. I think it was about a year before he lost his ability to speak. And she asked him about suffering
Mm.
and how, because in responding to the question, he said, the first step in the art of transforming suffering is to come home to our suffering and to recognize it.
Mm.
And the second step is for us to embrace it.
Mm.
Pause, pause a moment. What did he just say? Because they were just mind stopping to embrace your suffering. And
Mm.
yet, I think that's definitely true that to heal your suffering, you do have to embrace it.
Absolutely.
So, and then he went on to say, in his distinctive way of speaking, unresolved suffering is not just our own. It's the suffering of our parents and their parents and so on, handed down from generation to generation. It's not your fault. It's not their fault.
Mm.
The other person may not want to make us suffer or hurt us. People can become victims of their own suffering. Without that understanding, forgiveness is difficult. But if we can understand the deep suffering in him or her, the situation becomes different and you can forgive more easily. Now, I think it was Jack Kornfield who said forgiveness can come quickly or it can take a lifetime
Yeah,
to happen.
it's true.
But I think then there was this moment where I just realized that I totally forgave my birth mother.
Mm.
I felt like she was doing the best she could at that time in her life. And if my life had been different, if I hadn't had her as a parent, I wouldn't be who and what I am. Well, I'd be what I am. I wouldn't be who I am today
True.
because, and so maybe it was a perfect. Maybe I was born to those parents and all of that happened to bring me to this point in my life. That's how I feel.
Definitely.
And I thought I had forgiven her once before, or twice before. I thought I had forgiven her. So, yes, I was wrong about that. I thought she appeared to me the night she died in 76. She appeared to me. It was like I don't know what they call those kind of dreams, a waking dream or something. All of a sudden, she's in front of my bed. I sat upright in my bed, and she's standing there in a gown that was like kind of half wedding, half nightgown. And she's double shackled. She's in chains hanging from her hands. And she looks a bit angry. And I just sat up in the bed and I looked at her and I thought, so she's carried this guilt all her life. And I kept saying, I forgive you. I started crying. I kept saying, I forgive you. I forgive you. And finally, the chains fell off. And then she just kind of disappeared. So I thought, oh, phew, okay, I've forgiven her. But that wasn't really complete, wasn't it took some other things happening But finally, when I felt like, okay, there's nothing to forgive. I forgive her. I forgive myself. We have to have self-compassion. We have to drop our self-judgments. We have to drop the story so
Mhm.
that we can be. And and then I just jumped out of my chair. I started moving in ways I hadn't moved in years. I felt so liberated at
That's,
that point.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. What a yeah, liberation. Yeah, that I would call it that. And so what does healing look like for you now? Like, is it a destination or is it an ongoing process of actually returning to yourself?
No, I'm here.
Mm. Good. Yeah.
I've definitely returned.
She's here.
But, there's still little things that can happen that can still trigger
Mm.
those early effects for sure. And in fact, we were in a Costco not that long ago, and I watched this woman come and her baby was crying and crying. I don't know how old he was. He might have been a year old. And she left him in a cart, and she took her older son and she walked into a separate room. And this child is just crying, crying. And I know I probably shouldn't have done it, but I walked over to him, touched him on the back, and I said, "She's coming back. It's okay. She's coming back." Because I
Oh,
was pretty sure she was. She wasn't that far away.
yeah.
And and he just looked at me and he stopped crying. But I mean, I probably didn't have any real right to be doing that. I don't know what the situation really was. But I definitely can get triggered. I can get triggered if I'm in a car, a closed car, and my husband starts fussing about the driver in front of him, and he's talking louder and louder, and the driver can't hear you of that other car, but it's me, and I feel the energy coming in. I have to roll the window down sometimes because when I feel that strong an energy coming toward me, my I still have this little thing that wants to turn away or or
Mm.
or disassociate, which is what I learned to do as a child. You know, I learned. Um, I'm trying to watch the time. I learned about my husband asked me once, "Have you ever been raped?" And I said, "Well, no, but no, but I've had non-consensual sex sometimes." And he said,
Mm.
"Dawn, rape is non-consensual. That's what non-consensual sex is, rape." I
Wow.
said, "Well, I didn't have a knife to my throat or a gun to my head."
Mm.
And a friend of mine, she had said to me once, "Dawn, you give away your power so easily." And I
Wow.
didn't know what she meant,
That's
but I
interesting.
did notice during the non-consent, I had the ability to just leave my body, my mind. I just would go somewhere else,
Mm.
which I learned is called disassociation. And there's a lot that could be said about that. But I mean, I think I learned that as a technique
Mm.
very early on in my life.
Mm.
And now I don't do that anymore, but I did for a long time. If I
Interesting.
see, I can catch myself now if I'm starting to just shut down. If somebody's talking and I don't, the energy's too much, I just go somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I watch myself doing it and I can come back
Wow. Yeah.
if
Absolutely.
I feel safe enough with the person.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I can really relate with that. Absolutely. Yeah, disassociation. Well, it's a safety mechanism for us. It's just, it's just what we do. If there's a danger,
Right.
our nervous system detects danger. So yeah, very interesting. Um, so I wanted to ask as well, like for listeners who may be beginning to confront their own early wounds, where can they start?
Oh, people that are wanting to heal their own trauma.
Mm.
Well, it's just kind of everywhere these days. And in the back of my book, I do give online suggestions for that, and I give suggested reading, to which I've now added your book, although I haven't finished reading it myself. But so many books now have been written about this, and so there's podcasts, there's books, and also people are starting to share way more. A lot of celebrities are writing books now about their trauma, and they get 2,000 reviews overnight. But anyway, I think it's never too late, to
Yeah.
heal. And now there's so much help available, I
Mm,
think,
true.
from everywhere. And so, and I don't know if we ever totally, completely heal. I think it's kind of ongoing because I don't know about you, but I can still get triggered. As I said, I
Yeah.
can notice when I get triggered. And I do think, though, that there's help available. And I think it's vital that we share our stories. I
Mm,
think that's how we help each other heal
absolutely. Yeah.
so that we can, let go of our self-judgment, judging ourselves and judging others. And we can share our stories, and we can be here now
Yeah.
instead of back there when.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. So if you could speak to that infant version of yourself today, what would you say to her?
We're okay. We survived.
Mm,
We're still here. And we were never not okay.
beautiful. Thank you. And where can my listeners find your book?
Ah, well, Amazon, of course. But other places, in fact, I noticed somewhere the other day where they were bookshelf.org, Barnes and Noble, hopefully your local bookstore, but sometimes they don't always automatically carry your book. So sometimes you have to ask. Um, I'm not right now selling them myself. I may decide to do that, but I don't have that kind of a website right now. I do
Mm,
have a website with a lot of my articles and talks and that people can go to, but I'm not currently selling my book there.
no.
But
Mm,
they can contact me through that and
absolutely. They can.
from
Yeah.
the heart-hands.com.
Okay. Oh, perfect. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Mary. It's been such an honor having you on today and sharing your insights and sharing parts of your book and also your amazing journey that you've been on. I really honor the work that you're doing today, and I really appreciate just everything you've been through. I just think you're an absolute warrior. So, yeah.
Well, sometimes we have to be, don't we? Yeah,
You
yeah.
do.
Well,
Absolutely.
I very much appreciate being invited and to get to meet you in this way, at least. I doubt we'll ever meet in person, but you can never say never. But
Yeah,
so I
exactly.
want to wish you all the best also, Anu.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. So, my listeners, that's all we have time for today. Hope you found today's episode insightful, and I hope you've taken away some key points from Mary's amazing journey. And please do reach out if you have any questions about anything that we discussed. It's always an honor to actually hear from you. So, until the next episode, stay blessed, my friends.